When my cousin General James was serving overseas, our power-hungry HOA president seized the chance to bulldoze his historic family home, but she never expected him to return early with a U.S. senator on speed dial. Would you believe that her simple property violation landed half the HOA board in federal court, and turned our quiet suburb into a national scandal about veteran rights? Welcome to my channel. Please subscribe if you want more Karen and HOA stories. I'll never forget that morning I caught Karen Matthews taking pictures of my cousin's house. She didn't even try to hide it, just stood there in her designer workout clothes, her perfectly manicured nails tapping away at her phone screen. The same hands that voted to approve her husband's construction company contracts were now documenting what she called violations at James's home. Excuse me, Karen, but what exactly are you doing? I asked, walking up her with my coffee still in hand. I've been watching her circle James's colonial house like a vulture for the past 15 minutes from my kitchen window. Oh, good morning. Fake smile. Could have cracked glass. Just documenting some serious maintenance issues. The paint is clearly 2 shades off from the approved HOA color palette, and these hedges, she gestured dramatically at the perfectly trimmed bush, is my cousin's daughter, and I maintained every weekend they're at least half an inch above regulation height. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that James taught me to always keep my cool. Karen, James is literally serving our country right now. He's a general, and this house has been in our family for 4 generations. The paint was approved 3 years ago by the previous board. Rules changed, dear. She typed something into her phone, and deployment is no excuse for letting property values drop. Did you know the community center proposal could increase home values by 30%? That was the first time I heard about any community center. I watched her take more photos, my stomach turning as I remembered how the last 3 homeowners who'd fought with Karen had mysteriously ended up with liens on their properties. I spent that afternoon going through every HOA document I could find hidden in the meeting minutes from last month. There it was, a proposal for a state-of-the-art community center right in the middle of our block, right where James's house stood. The next week was a blur of certified letters arriving at James's house, each one citing more ridiculous violations. The brass knocker that survived 2 world wars was suddenly not in compliance. The rose bushes his daughter planted before his deployment were deemed invasive species. I tried calling James, but military communications were restricted during his current operation. All I could do was send emails. I wasn't sure he'd get in time. Each day more HOA board members drove by, slowly taking notes. I installed security cameras after I caught Karen's husband measuring the property line at midnight with a flashlight. The final straw came when I spotted Karen leading a group of suited investors on a tour of our street. This entire area will be transformed. I overheard her say the outdated structures will be removed, starting with that eyesore. She pointed directly at James's house. That night I called James's daughter Sarah at college. Something's wrong, I told her. I think they're planning something big, and your dad's deployment makes his house an easy target. But dad's supposed to be home in 2 weeks, Sarah said, her voice shaking. They can't just take our house, right? All our family photos are their mom's garden. Everything. I wanted to tell her it would be fine, but Karen had already survived 3 lawsuits from other homeowners. She knew exactly how to work the system. As I hung up the phone, a certified letter arrived. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night to vote on the community center proposal. My heart stopped when I read the fine print. They'd scheduled it exactly 13 days before James's return date, 1 day short of the 2 notice required for deployed service members under federal law. Karen had done her homework, and I realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about property values or community centers. This was personal, and she'd been planning it for months. I locked James's front door that night, unable to shake the feeling that these might be the last few hours this house would still belong to our family. On the wall, a photo of James receiving his first command caught my eye. He taught me that battles are won with strategy, not just strength. As I walked home, Karen's porch light snapped on. She stood in her doorway in a silk robe, watching me with that same glass-cutting smile. Better take pictures, she called out sweetly, for the memories. Little did she know I was already forming a battle plan of my own. I woke up to the sound of heavy machines rumbling down our street at 6:30 a.m. Through my bedroom window, I saw 3 yellow bulldozers in a large dump truck headed straight for James' house. My heart started racing as I threw on my shoes and grabbed the folder of legal documents I'd been keeping close since Karen started making threats. The morning fog hadn't even lifted when I ran outside, still in my pajamas. Karen was already there in her designer workout clothes, tapping away on her iPad with that fake smile she always wore. 2 police cars were parked nearby. She'd planned this thing. Stop, I yelled, running up with James's deployment papers in my hand. This house belongs to an active service member. You can't do this. My hands were shaking as I held up the power of attorney documents James had given me. Karen just laughed and kept tapping on her iPad. Oh, sweetie, she said, not even looking up. The board had an emergency meeting last night. We voted unanimously to proceed with immediate demolition due to severe structural issues. She finally looked at me, her eyes cold. It's all perfectly legal. We even have a city inspector's report. I felt sick to my stomach. What inspector, when I've Been here every day. The demolition crew chief walked over looking uncomfortable. I shoved James's property tax receipts at him. Look, everything's paid up. They can't do this. Karen stepped between us. Actually, we haven't received any tax payments for 6 months. Such a shame. She pulled out a thick folder. We sent multiple notices. I guess they got lost in the mail to wherever your cousin is stationed. My hands were trembling as I pulled up my phone's banking app. There were 6 canal checks to the HOA. All cleared by their bank. You cash these checks. I have proof right here. Karen waved her hand dismissively. Those were applied to other outstanding violations. See these reports: overgrown grass, unauthorized paint color, non-compliant mailbox height. She kept listing ridiculous violations. While the bulldozer engines grew louder, I called James's lawyer, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. Pick up. The call went to voicemail. The police officers stood by watching, saying they couldn't interfere with a civil matter. I felt helpless as the demolition crew started setting up their equipment. Neighbors began coming outside, drawn by the noise. Most stayed back, but old Mrs. Chen from next door shuffled over with her phone held high, recording everything. I remember when James's grandparents built this house, she said loudly, right after he came back from Korea. The whole neighborhood helped. Karen shot her an angry look. The bulldozer claw raised up and I couldn't hold back my tears. That's when my phone rang. The screen showed James's smiling face in his uniform. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Hey cousin. His voice was cheerful. You'll never believe this, but I managed to catch an early flight. Just landed at the airport. Thought I'd surprise everyone. I stared at the bulldozer inching toward his front porch where we used to drink lemonade in the summer. The porch swing where his daughter learned to read. The window of the room where his wife spent her last days. James, my voice cracked. You need to get here right now. Karen, she's there. About to. The crunch of wood splitting cut me off as the bulldozer claw took its first bite out of our family's history. Behind me, Karen was already on her phone too. Yes honey, they're starting now. Make sure your crew is ready to break ground for the community center next week. The permits, don't worry about those, I've got it all handled. The roar of the bulldozer drowned out everything else as I watched my cousin's life being torn apart, praying he would make it in time. What I didn't know then was that Karen's perfect plan was about to blow up in her face in ways none of us could have imagined. I'll never forget how the morning sun caught the general stars as James stepped out of my car. The bulldozer operator's face went white as a sheet, his hand frozen on the controls that were midway through destroying our grandparents' bay window. That beautiful stained glass our grandmother had picked out in 1962 lay shattered across the front lawn like broken dreams. Karen was in the middle of a speech about community progress to a small crowd of neighbors when she spotted James. Her perfectly styled hair seemed to deflate as he walked past her without even a glance. The only sound was his polished dress shoes crunching over broken glass and splintered wood. I watched my cousin, who had faced down warlords and terrorists, bend down to pick up his daughter Emma's first ballet trophy from the wreckage. The gold plastic dancer was snapped in half. He tucked it gently into his uniform pocket, his face calm but his eyes burning with a kind of quiet fury I'd only seen once before. When he got the news about his wife's cancer, ma'am, he addressed Karen with such military courtesy it made her flinch. I believe you're standing on my property. He pulled out a weathered document from his briefcase. This land deed dates back to 1947, when my grandfather returned from World War II. I'm curious about when exactly the HOA acquired the right to demolish it. Karen tried to recover, waving her HOA papers like a shield. The board's decision was unanimous. General, your cousin was informed. We have all the proper documentation for. James held up his hand, and Karen stopped mid-sentence like a schoolgirl caught passing notes. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single number on speed dial, and waited. The crowd of neighbors leaned in, not wanting to miss a word. Bill, yes, it's James. Remember that talk we had about local government overreach? He paused, looking straight at Karen. Well, you won't believe what I'm looking at right now. Yes, that property, the one my grandfather willed to me, the one protected under the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Karen's face changed from red to pale as James mentioned the federal law protecting deployed service members' property rights. But it was his next words that made her grab her designer purse like a life preserver. Yes, Senator Williams, the first think your committee would be very interested in how the HOA handled this situation. He listened for a moment. And bring the press. That's very thoughtful of you, Bill. See you in an hour. The demolition crew was already backing away, making excuses about lunch breaks and wrong addresses. Karen's husband Tom, who I'd seen bragging at the mailbox about his construction company's guaranteed contract for the new community center, was suddenly very interested in his shoes. James walked the perimeter of his ruined home, taking photos with his phone. He paused at his daughter's bedroom, or what was left of it. The walls were still standing, but the roof was gone. Emma's space posters fluttered in the breeze like surrender flags. The side of her NASA bed sheets mixed with broken roof tiles made my throat tight. So a young woman stepped forward from the crowd. I recognized her as Sarah from 3 Doors Down. Always too scared to speak at HOA meetings. I have videos of everything. They started at dawn. Ignored your cousin's legal papers. And she glanced nervously at Karen. I heard Mrs. Matthews on the phone. Last night talking about how the demolition had to be done before you got back. More neighbors stepped forward offering cell phone videos, copies of emails, meeting minutes. It was like a dam of fear had broken. Everyone had a story about Karen's threats and the HOA's bullying, but no one had dared to speak up until now. James thanked each person, taking their contact information with the same attention to detail he'd used planning military operations. I could almost see the strategy forming behind his eyes. He hadn't just come home to a destroyed house, he'd walked into a war zone of small-town politics and corruption. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Karen's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her face went from pale to gray as she read it. The local news had already picked up the story: decorated general's home demolished while deployed, HOA under federal investigation. James straightened his uniform and turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors, many now holding up phones to record. My grandfather built this house with his own hands after fighting for our country. He taught me that some things are worth fighting for even if the battlefield is in your own backyard. He smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. I do believe the real estate lawyers are about to arrive. Karen, I hope you kept good records. Through the crowd of murmuring neighbors, ISP oted Karen's Mercedes peeling out of her driveway, designer purse forgotten on our demolished front steps. But James wasn't done yet. He had that look in his eye, the same one he'd had before leading his most successful missions. Now, he said quietly, pulling out another document, let's talk about the interesting pattern of contracts awarded to board members' companies over the past 5 years. I never expected to see 6 news vans fighting for parking spots on our quiet street, but that's what happens when you mess with the wrong general. The morning started with Senator Williams marching up our driveway like he was heading into battle himself. He took one look at the rubble of James's home and pulled out his phone. Get me the state attorney general, he barked. Now Karen came running out of her house in her designer bathrobe, her face pale as chalk. Gone was her usual smirk. This is a private HOA matter, she squeaked, but nobody was listening. 2 police cars pulled up, and I watched her stumble backward. When the officers started taking photos of the destruction, I couldn't help but smile. When James pulled out the folder I'd been keeping safe, inside were copies of every check he'd sent to the HOA, along with certified mail receipts proving Karen had received them. Funny how all these payments went missing, he said, his voice steady and calm. The detective writing in his notebook didn't seem to find it funny at all. That's when the real bombshell dropped. A young intern from a senator's office who'd been digging through public records all morning came running up with a stack of papers. So you need to see this, she called out. The documents. Yes. How'd that Karen's husband's construction company had won the bid for the community center 3 months ago, before the HOA had even voted on the project. The reporters were having a field day. One of them discovered that Karen had sent violation notices to 3 other deployed service members' homes in the past year. Another found out she tried to force an elderly couple out last summer, claiming their garden gnomes were destroying property values. James stood in the middle of it all, still in his uniform, helping the forensics team salvage what they could from his crushed home. He didn't rage or yell like Karen, who was now screaming at her husband on her phone in her driveway. Instead, he carefully placed each recovered photo in metal in evidence bags, telling the story behind each one to the growing crowd of neighbors who'd come to support him. That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. She marched over, waving a thick HOA rulebook. Page 394 clearly states that the board has emergency powers to remove hazardous structures. She shouted. The crowd went silent. James turned to her slowly, and in that moment I saw why he'd risen to the rank of general. Karen, he said quietly, my great-grandfather built this house after returning from World War II. He used his own 2 hands to lay these bricks you just crushed. Tell me, what was the emergency? She opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. The cameras were rolling. Everyone waited. Then Bill, who'd been our mailman for 20 years, stepped forward. I have something you all need to see, he said, pulling out his phone. He'd taken a video yesterday of Karen and her husband walking around James's property, measuring and marking spots. They were talking about where the gym would go. Bill said this was before any vote happened. The state attorney general himself arrived just as Karen's husband pulled up in his Mercedes. He took one look at the scene and tried to drive away, but a police car was already blocking his exit. Inside his briefcase, they found the real smoking gun blueprints for the community center, dated 2 months before James's house was even marked for demolition. But Karen had one last desperate card to play, and none of us saw it coming. She pulled out a document that made James's face turn white. In his hand was something that could change everything, but that's a twist that would have to wait. The crowd of neighbors grew larger. News helicopters circled overhead, and in the middle of it all, James's teenage daughter Sarah arrived. Home from school, she stood at the edge of what used to be her bedroom, clutching her backpack, and asked the question that would break the internet. Dad, where are all my letters from when you were deployed? I watched. Karen's face turned ghost white as the FBI agents walked into the emergency HOA meeting. She tried to grab her designer purse and run, but they already blocked both exits. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide her panic when they started reading emails from her personal laptop, the ones showing how she'd been hiding James's tax payments for months while her husband's construction company prepared to build the community center. "This is ridiculous," Karen screamed, jumping up from her chair. "We followed all the rules." But then Agent Thompson played the recording from her phone call with the demolition company. "I don't care if the paperwork isn't final yet. Tear it down before he gets back. We'll sort out the details later." "The whole room," gasped Mrs. Johnson, who'd lived next door to us for 20 years, started crying. "You told us he'd abandoned the property," she said to Karen. "You said his taxes hadn't been paid in years." James stood quietly in the corner, still in his uniform, holding his daughter's cracked ballet trophy. He hadn't said a word since the agents arrived. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The FBI had found everything: fake violation notices, backdated board meetings that never happened, and even checks from James that Karen had hidden in her home office. The local news crews outside were having a field day. TR president faces federal charges, and veteran property scheme was already running across the bottom of every TV screen in town. Senator Williams had made sure this story wouldn't get buried, but the biggest shock came when they arrested Karen's husband at his office. Turns out the community center plans included luxury condos that would have made the millions they'd been planning. This for years, targeting homes of deployed service members who couldn't fight back. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, reporters, and building inspectors. 7 HOA board members faced criminal charges. Karen and her husband were looking at serious prison time for fraud and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. They'd messed with the wrong family, but the real victory wasn't watching Karen being led away in handcuffs or seeing her house go up for sale when they couldn't afford their fancy lawyers. It was watching our community come together to make things right. Veterans from 3 states showed up with tools and supplies. Local businesses donated materials. Even the mayor came by to help lay the foundation for James's new home, the colonial style Karen hated so much the Historical Society fast-tracked its protection, along with 6 other veteran-owned properties in our neighborhood. Today, I'm sitting on James' new front porch watching his daughter Sophie practice ballet in the yard. The house looks almost exactly like the old one, but better, built with love by people who understand what service and sacrifice really mean. There's a new wall in the kitchen where Sophie's height marks are growing right next to the shadow box holding pieces of the old house we managed to save. Karen's community center never happened. Instead, that land became a memorial park honoring local veterans. Sometimes when I walk by, I see families having picnics where Karen wanted to put her luxury condos. Sophie loves the playground equipment donated by the same construction companies that turned down Karen's sketchy contracts. James never brags about how he brought down a corrupt HOA board. He just smiles when new neighbors ask about the small piece of his old front door hanging beside his medals. It's a reminder. He tells them that home is worth fighting for. The FBI investigation is still ongoing, and they found similar schemes in other neighborhoods. But here's the thing that really gets me. Last week, I saw Karen's son helping at the Veterans Food Bank downtown. He looked me in the eye and said, "I'm sorry for what my parents did." Maybe that's the best victory of all, knowing that sometimes justice comes with a chance for healing. Gee, I never expected our story to change so many lives, but that's exactly what happened. After a video of Karen's arrest went viral, my phone started ringing non-stop with calls from military families across the country sharing similar HOA horror stories. James looked at me over his morning coffee and said, "We need to help them." All the news crews might have packed up and left our street, but we were just getting started with James' military connections and my experience documenting Karen's schemes. We created the Homeowners Defense Alliance. Every week more veterans joined our cause, sharing their own battles with unfair HOA boards who tried to bully them while they served overseas. Karen's replacement on the HOA board, a retired Marine named Mike, discovered something interesting in the old files. Our neighborhood wasn't the only target. Karen's husband's construction company had been eyeing properties in 3 other military communities. Each time the same pattern: suddenly strict enforcement of minor violations, lost paperwork, and quick demolition votes. While homeowners were deployed, I watched James transform our dining room into a command center with maps showing HOA trouble spots across the state pinned to every wall. The senator who helped us started drafting new laws to protect military families from predatory HOA practices. They named it the Matthews Act. Oh yes, we made sure Karen's name would be forever linked to the solution, not just the problem. The real surprise came when Karen's teenage daughter visited us one afternoon. She was crying, clutching a box of old photos she'd saved from our dumpster before the demolition. "Mom never told me these were in there," she whispered, handing James a dusty album of his daughter's baby pictures. "We thought we're lost forever. Sometimes good things come from unexpected places." Last week, we celebrated the first victory of our Homeowners Defense Alliance. A young Army nurse in Texas called us after her child tried to find her $100 per day for a flagpole her late father installed before she deployed. James made some calls, I drafted some letters, and suddenly that HOA board wasn't so brave anymore. The flag still flies, and now there's a precedent for others to follow. Remember that community center Karen wanted so badly. The land sits empty now, but not for long. James donated it to create affordable housing for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. The first families move in next month, and guess who volunteered to help them settle in? Karen's daughter. She says she wants to make things right. People ask me if I'm still angry about what happened. Honestly, I'm grateful. Without Karen's greed, we might never have discovered how many other military families needed help. We might never have built this amazing community of supporters who look out for each other while our heroes serve overseas. And James's daughter might never have learned the most important lesson of all: sometimes losing your home helps you build something even better. Speaking of James, he just walked in with another stack of case files, and that deter look in his eyes. There's a retired Navy SEAL in Florida whose HOA is trying to ban his service dog. And well, let's just say Karen taught us exactly what to do about bullies who mess with the wrong veterans. Want to guess how this one ends?